Close your eyes for just a moment. Think back to your childhood bedroom. Can you see it? The way the morning light filtered through the curtains, the smell of breakfast drifting up the stairs, the texture of your favorite blanket beneath your fingers. Open your eyes. What you just experienced, that flickering resurrection of a moment long past, is perhaps the most mysterious and magnificent thing in the entire universe. More complex than the quantum dance of atoms, more profound than the spiraling arms of distant galaxies. You just accessed memory. Welcome back, fellow travelers. This is the Midnight Explorer, where we wander through the quiet corridors of history, invention, and wonder. I'm so glad you're here with me tonight. Tonight, we're embarking on the longest journey we've ever taken together, not through space, but through the labyrinth of the human mind. We're going to explore something so fundamental to who you are that you've probably never stopped to marvel at it, something that makes you, you. Tonight, we're diving deep into the infinite library within, the story of memory itself. Get comfortable. Maybe pour yourself some tea. Dim the lights. This is going to be a long, gentle journey through time and consciousness. And I promise you, by the end of this exploration, you'll never think about your own mind the same way again. Let's begin where all good stories begin, with a mystery that haunted humanity for thousands of years. It's an evening in Athens, around 350 BCE. The sun is setting over the Acropolis, painting the marble temples in shades of honey and gold. The air smells of olive oil and stone dust, of bread baking in clay ovens and sea salt carried on the Mediterranean breeze. In a quiet courtyard, surrounded by scrolls and wax tablets, sits a man in his 60s, his beard white as cloud, his eyes still sharp with curiosity. His name is Plato. And tonight, he's wrestling with a question that won't let him sleep. Where do memories live? You see, Plato has just watched his elderly mentor, a student of the great Socrates, struggle to remember his own son's name. His old man's body was failing, yes, but this was different. This was something deeper. His memories, the very essence of his experiences, were dissolving, like wine poured into sand. Plato picks up his stylus and begins to write. The wax is smooth and cool beneath the bronze tip. He's developing an idea, a metaphor that will echo through 23 centuries of human thought. He writes, "Memory is like a wax tablet in the soul." Imagine that. Each experience, he suggests, is like a seal pressed into soft wax, leaving an impression. Some impressions are deep and clear, your first love, your mother's face, the day you learned of a great tragedy. Others are shallow, easily smoothed away by time's gentle hand. What you ate for lunch 3 Tuesdays ago, the face of a stranger in a crowd, a forgettable conversation. But here's what kept Plato awake at night. Where is this tablet? Not in the flesh, surely. The body decays, returns to earth. Yet memories sometimes survive in the living when the person who made them is long gone. When his teacher spoke of Socrates, dead now for decades, Plato could see that the memories weren't in his teacher's aged hands or failing legs. They seemed to exist somewhere else, somewhere immaterial. And so Plato concluded what felt true to his philosophical heart. Memories must live in the psyche, the soul itself, something eternal, something that transcended the temporary housing of flesh and bone. It was a beautiful idea, poetic, comforting even. It was also, we now know, not quite right. But here's the thing, and listen closely because this is important. Plato's wrongness was productive. His beautiful metaphor, his attempt to grasp at something invisible and profound, set humanity on a path of questioning that would take us places he could never have imagined. Because once you start asking, where do memories live, you inevitably start asking bigger questions. What is a memory really? How does it form? Why do we forget? And if we are, in some fundamental way, the sum of our memories, then who are we when they begin to fade? Let's walk forward through time. The sun sets on Plato's Athens. Centuries unspool like thread. Rome, 175 CE. The gladiatorial games are in full spectacle. 50,000 Romans pack the Colosseum, their roar like an ocean against stone. Blood and sand, glory and death, entertainment and horror mixed in equal measure. In the medical tent beneath the arena, a Greek physician named Galen tends to wounded gladiators. He's in his mid-40s now, his hands steady despite the chaos above. He's seen every kind of injury imaginable: torn muscles, broken bones, gashes that reveal the architecture of the human body in all its terrible beauty. But today, something unusual has happened. A gladiator, a Thracian fighter named Marcus, has taken a blow to the head. Not deep enough to kill, but hard enough to matter. When he wakes, his eyes are confused, frightened. "Where am I?" he asks. Galen tells him. "The Colosseum, Rome, the games." "What games?" Marcus asks. I was on the farm, my father's farm in Thrace. We were harvesting grain. Where's my father?" Galen's pulse quickens. He's read Plato, he's studied Aristotle, but here, in this wounded fighter who's forgotten the past 15 years of his life, forgotten his capture, his training, his very identity as a gladiator, Galen sees something that makes him question everything he thought he knew about memory. Because the memories aren't just faded, they're gone. Specific memories from a specific time, and the injury that took them wasn't to some metaphysical soul, it was to the very physical, very material brain. Galen begins a series of careful observations. He examines gladiators with different wounds. A cut to the arm, memory intact. A slash across the chest, memory intact. But trauma to the head? Sometimes memory vanishes like morning mist. He dissects the brains of animals, oxen, pigs, dogs. He finds them to be far more complex than anyone had imagined. Not just simple meat, but intricate structures, folds and valleys and mysterious chambers. He discovers that the brain is surprisingly soft, softer than any other organ, delicate, vulnerable. And then Galen makes an intuitive leap that will influence medicine for the next 1,500 years. He theorizes that memories are stored in the ventricles of the brain, those fluid-filled chambers he's observed in dissections. He imagines memory as a kind of vapor, a pneuma, a spiritual substance that nevertheless needs a physical place to reside. The ventricles, he believes, are like rooms in a house where memories dwell. Again, not quite right, but closer. Always closer. Galen writes his observations by lamplight, the smell of olive oil and ink filling his study. Outside, Rome sprawls in all its complexity, 1,000,000 souls with 1,000,000,000 memories among them, birth and death, love and loss, victory and defeat, all of it somehow encoded in the delicate tissue inside the skull. Galen pauses in his writing. He thinks about Marcus, the gladiator who'd forgotten his life. Where are those memories gone? Were they truly destroyed, or just misplaced? Hidden somewhere in the injured brain, waiting to be found again. He didn't know. He couldn't know, not with the tools available to him. But the question itself, the act of wondering, was moving humanity forward, inch by inch, century by century. The candle burns low. Galen sets down his stylus. Tomorrow, more wounded fighters, more mysteries written in flesh and bone. More questions than answers. Always. Let's jump forward, past the fall of Rome, past the chaos and reorganization of civilizations. We land in medieval Europe, where knowledge has retreated behind monastery walls. It's a cold morning in 1015 CE in the monastery of Recklinau, on an island in Lake Constance. Frost clings to the stone walls. A young monk named Hermann sits in the scriptorium, his breath visible in the early morning air, his fingers stiff around his quill. Hermann is copying medical texts, old Roman knowledge preserved through centuries of careful duplication, one letter at a time, one word at a time. This is how memory survives when people do not. Through the written word, through the dedication of scribes like Hermann who will never meet Galen, but who preserve his thoughts nonetheless. But Hermann is doing something monks aren't always supposed to do. He's thinking. As he copies Galen's theories about memory and the ventricles of the brain, Hermann is struck by a contradiction. The text says memories are like vapors in the chambers of the brain, but Hermann's own experience tells him something different. Last night, he had a dream about his childhood home, a place he hasn't seen in 12 years since entering the monastery as a boy. In the dream, he could smell his mother's bread baking, could feel the specific texture of the wooden table in their cottage, could hear his sister's laugh, bright as bells. When he woke, those sensations faded, yes, but they didn't feel like vapors. They felt like something more substantial, more constructed. His mind had somehow rebuilt his mother's cottage from component parts, smell, touch, sound, and vision, all woven together into a single coherent experience. How could a vapor do that? Hermann keeps these thoughts to himself. Inquiry is permitted, even encouraged in this particular monastery, but some questions feel dangerous. Questions about the nature of the soul, about how the divine spark of consciousness relates to the wet machinery of the brain. These questions sit at the intersection of medicine and theology, and that's always treacherous ground. But he keeps thinking anyway, because that's what humans do. We can't help ourselves. Across the Islamic world during this same period, scholars are making their own discoveries about memory. In Baghdad, in Cordoba, in Cairo, physicians are building on both Greek and Indian medical knowledge, creating sophisticated understandings of the brain and its functions. A Persian physician named Avicenna, writing around 1020 CE, develops a theory that different parts of the brain handle different aspects of memory. Immediate sensory experience in one area, retention in another, recollection in another. He's wrong about the specifics. He still thinks it's all about those ventricles, but he's right about the fundamental insight. Memory isn't one thing. It's a process, a system, multiple parts working together. Imagine that. 1,000 years ago, a physician in Persia, working by candlelight, just like Hermann in his monastery, is beginning to grasp that memory isn't a storage locker, but a symphony. Not a filing cabinet, but a collaboration between different regions of the brain, each contributing its part to the whole. The knowledge spreads, slowly, through trade routes and translations. Arabic texts make their way to Europe. European observations travel east. Jewish scholars moving between Christian and Muslim worlds carry ideas with them like precious cargo. Memory, the thing that makes us human, is itself being remembered, preserved, transmitted across cultures and centuries. There's something almost recursive about it, isn't there? We remember how to remember. We use memory to study memory. We write down our understanding so that future generations will remember what we learned. It's memory all the way down. Hermann finishes his copying for the day. His hands are cramped, his eyes tired. Outside, the sun is setting over Lake Constance, turning the water to hammered silver. He's preserved a few more pages of ancient knowledge. He's added, in the margins, a few of his own careful observations. Tomorrow, another monk in another monastery will continue the work. The chain remains unbroken. Venice, 1543. The printing press has changed everything. Books, once rare as diamonds, each one copied by hand over months or years, now multiply like rabbits. Knowledge spreads faster than ever before in human history. And with that spread comes acceleration. Questions build on questions. Answers breed new mysteries. In a workshop near the Rialto Bridge, a young anatomist named Andreas Vesalius is working on what will become one of the most important books in the history of medicine, De Humani Corporis Fabrica, On the Fabric of the Human Body. Vesalius is 28 years old and absolutely obsessed with getting things right. For too long, he believes, medicine has relied on ancient authorities, Galen especially, without actually looking at human bodies, without doing the messy, necessary work of dissection and observation. So Vesalius looks, carefully, precisely. He obtains cadavers, legally and otherwise. The otherwise part we won't dwell on, but let's just say Renaissance anatomists were very dedicated to their craft. He dissects brains with extraordinary care, making detailed sketches of what he sees. And what he sees contradicts Galen. The brain isn't a simple container for memory vapors. It's incomprehensibly complex. Gray matter and white matter, folded and convoluted in ways that seem almost deliberate. The cerebrum, the cerebellum, the brainstem. Structures within structures. Vesalius doesn't yet know what most of these structures do, but he can see that the old model is insufficient. The ventricles exist, yes, but they're empty except for fluid. They're not chambers where memories dwell like ghosts in rooms. They're something else entirely. Perhaps just drainage, perhaps cooling systems, perhaps something he can't yet fathom. The detailed engravings in his book are works of art as much as science. The printer has captured every fold of the brain, every curve and valley. When the book is published, it spreads across Europe, and physicians everywhere have to confront the same uncomfortable truth. We don't actually know how memory works. We've been guessing. Beautifully, poetically, but guessing nonetheless. It's a humbling realization. But humility is where real knowledge begins. Jump forward another century. England, 1664. Thomas Willis, an English physician, is conducting his own careful dissections. He's building on Vesalius's work, going deeper, asking more specific questions. Willis is particularly interested in the gray matter of the brain, that wrinkled, walnut-like substance that seems so uniform and yet must somehow encode the entire complexity of human experience. Willis is the first to use the term neurology, the study of the nervous system. He's beginning to map out different regions of the brain and hypothesize about their functions. He's wrong about many things. He thinks the cerebellum is the seat of involuntary movement, while the cerebrum handles voluntary actions. But he's right about the crucial insight. Different parts of the brain do different things. And one night, after a particularly long day of dissection and documentation, Willis sits by his fire and writes something remarkable in his journal. Memory must needs be a strong and firm impression made upon the brain, as if a seal were pressed into wax. Wait, haven't we heard that metaphor before? Plato, 2,000 years earlier, the wax tablet. But here's what's beautiful. Willis means something entirely different. He's not talking about metaphysical soul wax. He's talking about physical changes in the substance of the brain itself. He's imagining, without microscopes powerful enough to see it, without any of the tools of modern neuroscience, that experience somehow alters the very tissue of the brain. He's imagining what we now call neuroplasticity, though he won't live to see it proven. It will take another 3 centuries to confirm his intuition, but the intuition itself, that's the spark. That's the moment when ancient philosophy meets cutting-edge anatomy and produces a new question. If memory changes the brain physically, can we find those changes? Can we see them? Can we understand the mechanism? The fire crackles. Willis sets down his quill. Outside, London sleeps, a city of 500,000 souls, each carrying their own constellation of memories. Birth and childhood, first loves and bitter disappointments. The Great Plague is still fresh in everyone's mind, all those lost, all those memories extinguished. Willis looks at his sketches of the brain. Such a small thing, really, 3 pounds of tissue, and yet inside it, somehow, entire worlds. He doesn't have the answer yet, neither do we fully, but we're getting closer. Always closer. Italy, 1780. Lightning splits the sky above Bologna, illuminating the workshop of Luigi Galvani for a brief, brilliant moment. Galvani is a physician and physicist, and tonight he's working late, studying the bodies of freshly dissected frogs. It's his wife, Lucia, who first notices the strange phenomenon. She's helping him prepare specimens, and when a scalpel touches the exposed nerve of a frog's leg during a lightning strike, the leg twitches, violently, as if alive. Galvani's pulse quickens. He begins experimenting. Not waiting for storms now, but creating sparks with static electricity machines. Each time he introduces electricity to the frog's nerve, the muscle contracts. It's responding. Dead tissue responding to electricity as if receiving a command. Galvani's mind races. The ancients spoke of animal spirits flowing through nerves, carrying messages from the brain to the body. Could those spirits actually be electrical? It's a revolutionary thought. The brain isn't just soft tissue storing memory vapors. It might be an electrical machine. Thoughts might be currents. Memories might be patterns of electrical activity. Of course, Galvani doesn't have the full picture. His competitor, Alessandro Volta, will prove that the electricity is coming from the metal instruments, not the frog itself. But Galvani's core insight remains valid. Nerves conduct electrical signals. The brain, we're beginning to realize, is electric. Fast forward to Germany, 1849. Hermann von Helmholtz, a physicist and physician who moves between disciplines like a dancer between partners, has just measured something extraordinary: the speed of nerve transmission. He's done it by stimulating a frog's nerve at different distances from the muscle and timing how long it takes for the muscle to contract. The math is simple, but profound. Nerve signals travel at about 90 feet per second. Not instantaneous, not the speed of thought as people imagined, but measurable, physical, real. Helmholtz publishes his findings, and the implications ripple through the scientific community. If nerve signals have a measurable speed, then the brain is bound by physical laws. Memory isn't some ghostly phenomenon outside the realm of physics. It's embedded in the material world, in cells and chemistry and electricity. The poetic among the scientists feel something lost in this revelation. The brain reduced to wires and currents? Where's the magic in that? Where's the mystery of consciousness, of memory, of the ineffable sense of self? But others, Helmholtz among them, see it differently. Understanding the mechanism doesn't diminish the wonder. It amplifies it. Because now we can ask better questions. How does electricity encode memory? Where in the brain do these patterns form? And most tantalizingly, if we understand the code, could we read it? Could we see someone's memories? Perhaps even record them? It's science fiction. It will remain science fiction for more than a century. But the question has been asked, and once asked, questions have a way of demanding answers. England, 1861. A French physician named Paul Broca is about to make a discovery that will change everything we think we know about memory's geography. He's examining a patient, a man who can understand speech perfectly well, but can't produce it. The patient, whom history will know as tan, can only say, tan. That's it. Just tan, over and over, regardless of what he means to say. The patient, whom history will know as tan, dies. Broca performs an autopsy and finds damage to a specific area of the left frontal lobe. And suddenly, everything clicks into focus. Different parts of the brain do different things. Not vaguely, as Willis had suggested, but specifically. This region, now called Broca's area, is responsible for speech production. Damage it, and you lose the ability to speak, even though you still understand language, still remember words, still have thoughts to express. Other researchers jump on this finding. Within a decade, Carl Wernicke discovers another area, this one responsible for language comprehension. Damage Broca's area, and you can't speak. Damage Wernicke's area, and speech becomes nonsensical. Words flow, but meaning is lost. The brain has neighborhoods, districts, regions with specific jobs. And if language has specific locations, what about memory? Where in the 3-pound universe of the brain do our memories actually live? The race is on to create a map, to chart the terra incognita of the mind. Hartford, Connecticut, 1953. A young man, let's call him Henry, though the world will come to know him as H.M., is about to undergo an experimental surgery that will teach us more about memory than a century of careful theory. Henry has severe epilepsy. seizures that tear through his brain multiple times a day, making normal life impossible. He's tried every medication available. Nothing works. The seizures are getting worse, and his doctors fear they'll eventually kill him. A neurosurgeon named William Scoville proposes a radical solution. Remove the parts of Henry's brain where the seizures seem to originate. Both hippocampi, seahorse-shaped structures deep in the temporal lobes. It's experimental, dangerous, but Henry's desperate. The surgery takes place on September 1st, 1953. It's technically successful, the epilepsy is greatly reduced, but when Henry wakes, something is terribly, profoundly wrong. He can't form new memories. He can remember his childhood, can remember his parents, his school, events from his early 20s, but anything that happened after the surgery? Gone. Within minutes. Literally within minutes. You could tell Henry your name, have a conversation with him, leave the room and return 5 minutes later. To him, you'd be a complete stranger. He'd have no memory of ever meeting you. You could repeat this experiment 100 times, and each time would be, for Henry, the very first time. Imagine that. Imagine living in an eternal present where nothing sticks, where every experience washes away like words written in sand at the tide line. A psychologist named Brenda Milner begins working with Henry, and her research over the following decades becomes foundational to our understanding of memory. Because Henry's case reveals something crucial. Memory isn't one thing, it's multiple systems. Henry can't form new declarative memories, memories of facts and events, but he can learn new skills. Milner teaches him to trace a star pattern while looking at his hand in a mirror, a tricky task that requires practice, and Henry gets better at it. Day after day, his performance improves, even though, every session, he insists he's never done this before. His hands remember, even though he doesn't. This tells us that skill memory, procedural memory, is stored differently than factual memory. Different systems, different parts of the brain. The hippocampus, we now know, is crucial for consolidating new declarative memories. It's like a librarian that takes your daily experiences and files them away in long-term storage. Without it, you're stuck in the reading room, constantly taking in new books, but never able to shelve them. Henry lives with this condition for 55 years. He's always polite, always friendly, always meeting you for the very first time. Researchers visit him over decades, and he helps them understand memory in ways no amount of theory could have achieved. He dies in 2008, still unable to remember what he had for breakfast, still unable to recall the doctors he's seen thousands of times. But his contribution to science? That we remember. There's something profound about that. Something almost beautiful. Henry couldn't make new memories, but he helped create knowledge that will be remembered for as long as neuroscience exists. In a sense, he achieved a kind of immortality through the very thing he lost. After his death, researchers preserved Henry's brain and sectioned it into impossibly thin slices, 2,401 of them, each one digitally scanned and made available to researchers worldwide. You can, right now, look at the architecture of Henry's hippocampus, or what's left of it, rather. You can see the absence, the gap where his future should have been stored. We need to go smaller now, much smaller, down past the level of brain regions and structures, down past individual neurons, down to the molecular level, where memory is not just an electrical pattern, but a chemical dance. Stockholm, 1906. Santiago Ramón y Cajal shares the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine with Camillo Golgi. Both men have spent decades studying the fine structure of the nervous system, though they disagree about almost everything. Golgi believes the brain is a continuous network, a reticular net of tissue all connected together. Cajal believes something different, individual cells, neurons, separate but communicating across tiny gaps. Cajal is right, though it will take decades to prove definitively. Using a silver staining technique, ironically one that Golgi himself developed, Cajal has drawn the most exquisite illustrations of neurons ever created. Even now, more than a century later, they're breathtaking. He's captured the architecture of brain cells with an artist's eye and a scientist's precision. And in these drawings, Cajal sees something that sparks an idea. Neurons aren't static. They're branches, the dendrites that receive signals and the axons that send them, can grow, can change shape, can form new connections. Cajal hypothesizes that learning and memory might involve physical changes at the level of individual neurons, new connections forming, existing connections strengthening. He writes, "Every impression that reaches us leaves a trace in our brain that can be awakened afresh thanks to the possibility of a current following the same route." It's the wax tablet metaphor again, but now at the microscopic level. Experience makes physical impressions, but the wax is neural tissue, and the impressions are structural changes in the connections between cells. He's describing neuroplasticity before the word exists. He's imagining synaptic strengthening before anyone knows what synapses really are. Fast forward to 1949, Montreal. A psychologist named Donald Hebb publishes a book called The Organization of Behavior. In it, he proposes a simple but powerful idea. When an axon of cell A is near enough to excite cell B and repeatedly or persistently takes part in firing it, some growth process or metabolic change takes place in one or both cells, such that A's efficiency, as one of the cells firing B, is increased. This will become known as Hebbian learning, often simplified to cells that fire together, wire together. It's the mechanism Cajal intuited. When two neurons are active at the same time, say the neuron that responds to the smell of roses and the neuron activated by your grandmother's voice, the connection between them strengthens. Over time, one can trigger the other. Smell roses, and you think of your grandmother, even if she's not there. That's memory at the cellular level. But Hebb is still theorizing. He has no way to see these changes actually happening. The technology doesn't exist yet. Norway, 1973. Two neuroscientists, Tim Bliss and Terje Lomo, are stimulating neurons in rabbit hippocampi with rapid bursts of electricity. They're trying to understand how neurons communicate across synapses, those tiny gaps between cells. And they discover something remarkable. If you stimulate a synapse repeatedly, it gets stronger. The postsynaptic neuron becomes more responsive, and this strengthening lasts hours, days, weeks potentially. They call it long-term potentiation, or LTP. It's Hebb's theory proven. It's Cajal's intuition confirmed. It's the physical basis of memory finally visible under experimental conditions. This is it. This is how experience writes itself into the tissue of the brain. When you learn something new, your phone number, your best friend's birthday, the face of someone you love, what's happening at the most fundamental level is that synapses are strengthening. Proteins are being synthesized, gene expression is changing, the physical structure of your brain is reorganizing itself. You are quite literally not the same person you were yesterday, not at the molecular level. Every experience rewrites you, just a little bit. Over subsequent decades, researchers will identify the specific molecules involved, NMDA receptors that detect coincident activity, calcium ions that flood into cells as a signal, Krebs proteins that trigger gene transcription, a whole cascade of molecular events that transform fleeting electrical activity into lasting structural change. It's staggeringly complex. A single memory, say your first day of school, involves millions of synapses changing across multiple brain regions. The visual cortex storing the image of your classroom, the auditory cortex storing your teacher's voice, the amygdala adding emotional color, the hippocampus binding it all together into a coherent narrative. And somehow, miraculously, when you recall that memory years later, all those scattered components reassemble. The symphony plays again. Not perfectly. Memories aren't recordings, they're reconstructions. Each time you remember something, you're rebuilding it from components. And in that rebuilding, things can change. Details can shift. Emotions can intensify or fade. Memory, we're learning, is not a filing system. It's more like a storytelling system. And sometimes, we're not entirely reliable narrators. Seattle, 1974. A graduate student named Elizabeth Loftus is about to challenge one of our most fundamental assumptions about memory, that it's accurate, that we can trust our own recollections, that memory is a faithful record of the past. She's designed an elegant experiment. She shows participants a video of a car accident, then asks them questions about what they saw. But here's the trick. She varies the wording of one crucial question. To some participants, she asks, how fast were the cars going when they hit each other? To others, how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other? The difference is subtle, just one word, hit versus smashed. And yet, participants who heard smashed estimate significantly higher speeds. More than that, when questioned a week later, they're more likely to report seeing broken glass in the video, even though there was no broken glass. One word has rewritten their memory. Loftus calls this the misinformation effect, and it's profoundly unsettling. Because if a single word in a question can alter our recollection of something we witnessed minutes ago, what does that say about our memories of events from years ago? What does it say about eyewitness testimony in court cases? About our childhood memories? About the narratives we've built our entire identities around? She continues her research over the following decades, and the findings are consistently troubling. False memories can be implanted, not just details, but entire events. In one famous experiment, she convinces 25% of participants that they were lost in a shopping mall as a child, an event that never happened. She does this simply by having a trusted family member tell them the story, adding a few specific details, and asking them to try to remember. And they do. They remember. They add details that weren't in the suggested story. They describe the feelings, the fear, the kind stranger who helped them. The memory feels real to them because, in a sense, it is real. It's stored in their brain the same way an accurate memory would be. The molecular machinery doesn't distinguish between memories of actual events and memories of imagined or suggested events. This has profound implications. For the justice system, where innocent people have been convicted based on confident but mistaken eyewitness identification. For therapy, where suggestive questioning might create false memories of childhood abuse. For all of us, trying to understand our own past, our own story. Are your earliest childhood memories real? How can you be sure? You've probably retold them many times, and each retelling is a reconstruction. You've seen family photos of events from your childhood, and those images might have integrated with your actual memories. You've heard stories from parents and siblings, and their versions might have overwritten your own. The person you were at age 5 wrote some memories. The person you became at 15 read those memories and rewrote them. The person you are now reads that second draft and creates a third version. Which one is true? Maybe they all are. Maybe none are. Maybe the question itself is wrong. Because memory, we're discovering, isn't about accuracy. It's about meaning. It's about creating a coherent narrative that allows us to function in the present and plan for the future. Perfect accuracy would actually be a curse. There's a case study from the 1920s, a Russian journalist named Solomon Cherishevsky who had a memory so powerful, so eidetic, that he couldn't forget anything. He remembered every conversation, every face, every random string of numbers anyone told him. It sounds like a superpower, doesn't it? It was a prison. Cherishevsky couldn't read a book without remembering every detail of every page, which made it impossible to grasp the broader themes. He couldn't have a simple conversation without being distracted by memories of every other conversation he'd ever had with that person. His past was so vivid, so present, that he couldn't live fully in the now. He eventually struggled to hold a job, to maintain relationships, to function in society. His memory was too good. It wouldn't summarize, wouldn't extract meaning, wouldn't let irrelevant details fade into the background. We need to forget. We need our memories to be reconstructive rather than reproductive. We need the ability to update our understanding of the past in light of the present. This isn't a bug in the system, it's a feature. But it's an uncomfortable feature, isn't it? It means we can't fully trust our own minds. It means the past is always slightly uncertain, always open to revision. And yet, somehow, we function. We build lives, we maintain identities, we love and work and create, all based on memories that are, at best, approximations. Maybe that's okay. Maybe it's more than okay. Maybe it's exactly what we need to be human. London, 2000. A neuroscientist named Eleanor Maguire is scanning the brains of London taxi drivers, and she's about to discover something extraordinary. London taxi drivers have to pass something called the Knowledge, a notoriously difficult test that requires them to memorize all 25,000 streets in central London, plus thousands of landmarks, restaurants, hotels, and theaters. It takes most people 3 to 4 years of study to pass. Maguire hypothesizes that all this intensive spatial learning might actually change the physical structure of their brains. Specifically, the hippocampus, the same structure that was removed from patient HM, the region we know is crucial for forming new memories. She's right. The posterior hippocampus of London taxi drivers is significantly larger than average, and the longer they've been driving, the more pronounced the difference. The brain grows where you use it most. It's neuroplasticity on a scale visible to brain imaging. It's proof that adult brains remain malleable, changeable, capable of significant structural reorganization based on experience. But here's what's even more interesting. Maguire finds that this enlargement comes at a cost. The anterior hippocampus, the front part, is actually smaller in taxi drivers than in average people, and taxi drivers perform worse on certain other memory tasks. The brain isn't unlimited. When you allocate resources to one type of memory, other types might suffer. It's a trade-off, a zero-sum game played out in gray matter. Musicians show similar changes. The motor cortex regions controlling finger movements are enlarged. Violinists have particularly developed areas for the left hand, the fingering hand, which requires more precise control than the bowing hand. Blind people who read Braille develop enlarged sensory cortex regions for the reading finger. Jugglers show growth in regions associated with visual motion processing. Your brain reflects your life, literally, physically. The things you do repeatedly, the skills you practice, the information you learn, all of it writes itself into your neural architecture. Which raises a question. What is our modern lifestyle writing into our brains? We spend hours a day looking at screens, scrolling through social media, jumping from link to link, thought to thought, never staying with any single piece of information for long. What is this doing to our hippocampi, to our attention systems, to our ability to form deep, coherent memories? There's preliminary research suggesting that constant digital multitasking might be associated with structural changes in the brain, reduced gray matter density in regions associated with cognitive control, decreased ability to maintain focus. But causation is hard to prove. Maybe people with certain brain structures are more drawn to multitasking. Maybe both the brain changes and the behavior are caused by some third factor. What we do know is this: the way you use your brain shapes its structure, and the structure of your brain shapes what you're capable of. It's a feedback loop, a reciprocal relationship. You shape your brain by what you do. Your brain shapes what you can do by what it becomes. So the question isn't just, how does memory work? The question is, what kind of memory system do we want to build? Because we're building it right now, every day. Every choice about where to direct our attention, what to learn, what to practice, what to forget. We're all conducting an experiment on ourselves, often without realizing it. Everyone remembers where they were on certain days. September 11th, 2001, if you're old enough. The day a president was assassinated. The day you learned of a personal tragedy. These memories are vivid, detailed. You can remember what you were wearing, who you were with, the exact moment you heard the news. Psychologists call them flashbulb memories. But here's the thing, they're not actually more accurate than other memories. They just feel more accurate. Studies done in the days and weeks after 9/11 and then years later show that people's recollections of that day change over time just like any other memory. Details shift, stories evolve, but the confidence remains absolute. I remember exactly where I was, exactly what I was doing. That certainty comes from emotion, specifically from a small almond-shaped structure deep in the brain called the amygdala. The amygdala is your emotional alarm system. It responds to threats, to intense experiences, to anything that provokes a strong feeling. And when it activates, it sends signals that enhance memory formation. Evolutionarily, this makes perfect sense. If something nearly killed you, you'd better remember it. If you found food in a certain location, you should recall that place. Emotional experiences are often the most important to remember, so evolution gave us a system that stamps them into memory with extra force. But that system doesn't distinguish between genuinely important emotional events and trivial ones. It just responds to emotional intensity, which is why you might forget what you had for lunch yesterday, but vividly remember an embarrassing moment from middle school. The embarrassment was emotionally intense, so the amygdala ensured that memory got written in bold ink. And here's where things get complicated. Boston, 1990s. Roger Pittman, a psychiatrist and neuroscientist, is working with patients with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. These are people whose memories are causing them active harm. Soldiers who relive combat experiences, assault survivors who are haunted by what happened to them. Their memories are too strong, too vivid, too emotionally charged. Pittman has an idea. What if you could weaken those memories? Not erase them, that's neither possible nor desirable, but reduce their emotional intensity. He knows that memory consolidation, the process by which short-term memories become long-term, involves protein synthesis and takes time. And he knows that beta blockers, drugs commonly used to treat high blood pressure, can interfere with the amygdala's ability to enhance memory formation. So he conducts an experiment. Trauma patients are asked to write down and read aloud their traumatic memory, a process that reactivates the memory, temporarily making it unstable and open to modification. Then, immediately after, they're given a beta blocker. The results are striking. Weeks later, when asked to recall the traumatic event, patients who received the beta blocker show reduced physiological stress responses. Their hearts don't race as much. They don't sweat profusely. The memory is still there. They can still recount what happened, but the emotional punch has been diminished. It's not forgetting. It's something more subtle. It's emotional blunting of a memory that was causing harm. The implications are profound and unsettling. If we can weaken traumatic memories, should we? Is there value in emotional pain, in carrying the full weight of what we've experienced? And does modifying memories change who we are in some fundamental way? And if we can weaken painful memories, could we enhance positive ones? Could we make happy memories more vivid, more emotionally resonant? Should we? There's a beautiful and terrible truth here. We are our memories, but our memories are not fixed. They're dynamic, changeable, vulnerable. Every time you recall a memory, you reconsolidate it, you put it back together, and in that rebuilding, it can change. Details can be added or lost. Emotions can be amplified or diminished. This is why therapy works when it works. Talking about traumatic events repeatedly in a safe context can gradually reduce their emotional charge. Each recall is an opportunity for reconsolidation, and each reconsolidation can incorporate the safety and support of the therapeutic environment. You're not erasing the past, you're changing your relationship to it. But it also means our most precious memories, our first kiss, the day our child was born, the last conversation with a dying parent. Those memories are not preserved in amber. They're changing every time we revisit them. The 10th time you tell the story of how you met your spouse, you're not recalling the original event. You're recalling the 9th time you told the story, which was a recall of the 8th time, and so on, like copies of copies of copies, each one degrading slightly, changing slightly, diverging from the original. And yet, paradoxically, the story often becomes more meaningful over time, more polished, more connected to your identity. We are not recorders, we are storytellers. And the stories we tell about our past shape the people we become in the future. Let's jump to the present day. 2025. We're living in an age where memory has become externalized in ways that would seem like magic to anyone from even 50 years ago. Your phone remembers your appointments. The cloud remembers your photos, time-stamped and location-tagged. Social media platforms remember your past posts, your old friends, your former interests. Google knows what you searched for. Amazon knows what you bought. We've created a digital mirror of our lives, a backup system for human memory. Is this good or bad? The answer, as always, is complicated. On one hand, we're freed from the burden of remembering trivial details. You don't need to memorize phone numbers anymore. Don't need to remember how to get to a restaurant. Your GPS will guide you. Don't need to recall the name of that actor in that movie. Google is 2 seconds away. This frees up cognitive resources for other things. Deeper thinking, creative work, making connections between ideas rather than just storing facts. On the other hand, there's evidence that we're losing something in the exchange. A psychologist named Linda Henkel did an experiment at an art museum. She had participants tour the gallery under 2 conditions. In one, they photographed the artworks they saw. In the other, they simply observed. Later, she tested their memory for what they'd seen. The photographing group remembered significantly less about the artworks than the observing group. Both the overall experience and specific details were hazier. Henkel calls this the photo-taking impairment effect. When we offload memory to a device, our brains seem to engage less deeply with the experience. It's as if, knowing the phone will remember, we give ourselves permission not to. You can probably feel this in your own life. How many times have you taken a photo of something? A beautiful sunset, a page from a book, a whiteboard full of notes, intending to engage with it later, but never do. The photo sits in your camera roll, unviewed, while the memory of the actual moment fades. We're creating external memory palaces, vast digital archives of our lives. But are we living those lives less fully in the process? There's also something unsettling about the permanence of digital memory. For all of human history, forgetting was natural. Old memories faded, embarrassing moments from your youth eventually dimmed into obscurity. You could reinvent yourself, could leave your past behind. Not anymore. That stupid thing you posted when you were 16, it's still findable. That embarrassing photo from a party, somewhere on someone's hard drive. That poorly thought out opinion you shared online, forever. The internet doesn't forget. And there's no selective weakening, no natural pruning. Everything is preserved with equal fidelity, the profound and the trivial, the beautiful and the shameful, all mixed together in an eternal, searchable archive. Humans aren't designed for this kind of total recall. We need forgetting. We need the past to become fuzzy, to be rewritten, to fade into narrative, rather than remaining as harsh, unforgiving data. There's a reason European privacy laws include a right to be forgotten. It's not just about privacy, it's about human psychology, about the need for our past selves to not completely determine our future selves, about the need for grace, for second chances, for evolution. But there's another side to digital memory that's more hopeful. For people with memory disorders, Alzheimer's patients, people with traumatic brain injuries, patients like HM, digital tools can provide a lifeline. Photos and videos can help them maintain connection to their past. Reminder apps can help them function in the present. For historians and researchers, the digital archive is a gift. We can study patterns in human behavior at scales that were never before possible. We can preserve voices and stories that would otherwise be lost. And for all of us, there's something profound about being able to revisit moments we thought were gone forever, to see our children as toddlers, hear a loved one's voice years after their death, read our own thoughts from decades past. Digital memory gives us a superpower, the ability to defy time's natural erosion, to hold on to what would otherwise slip away. The question is, how do we use this power wisely? How do we balance preservation with the need to move forward? How do we remember without being trapped by our past? How do we use technology to enhance our human capacity for memory without replacing it entirely? These are not technical questions. They're philosophical ones, ethical ones. They're questions about what kind of humans we want to be. And we're all answering them, whether we realize it or not, every time we decide to take a photo or not, to post something or keep it private, to archive our thoughts or let them be ephemeral. We're living through a revolution in human memory. It's happening right now, in our pockets, in our habits, in the very structure of our attention and consciousness. And we're only just beginning to understand what it means. Let's talk about where we're headed, about the frontiers of memory research that are just beginning to open up. California, 2013. A team of neuroscientists led by Susumu Tanagawa accomplishes something that sounds like science fiction. They create a false memory in a mouse. Here's how they do it. First, they use optogenetics, a technique that allows them to control specific neurons with light. They've genetically modified certain neurons so they'll activate when exposed to blue light. They place a mouse in a chamber, chamber A, and tag the neurons that activate during that experience. These neurons represent the memory of chamber A. The next day, they put the mouse in a different chamber, chamber B, and deliver a mild electric shock while simultaneously activating those tagged neurons with light. So the mouse is experiencing chamber B, but the neurons associated with chamber A are firing. Then comes the test. They put the mouse back in chamber A with no shock. The mouse freezes in fear. It's terrified of a chamber where nothing bad ever happened to it, because in its brain, the memory of chamber A has been linked with the experience of shock. They've created a false memory at the level of neurons and synapses. It's unsettling, and it raises questions that sound like they're from a Philip K. Dick novel. If we can create false memories in mice, could we do it in humans? Could we implant experiences that never happened? Could we erase genuine memories we'd rather not have? Should we? There's ongoing research into memory enhancement as well. DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, has funded studies on brain stimulation techniques that can improve memory formation. The military applications are obvious. Soldiers who can remember terrain better, learn skills faster, recall intelligence more accurately. But the implications extend far beyond the military. What if students could stimulate their brains while studying and retain information more effectively? What if Alzheimer's patients could slow their memory decline with targeted electrical stimulation? Early results are promising. Transcranial electrical stimulation, passing weak electrical currents through the skull, has been shown to enhance memory consolidation during sleep. It's not dramatic. We're talking about percentage point improvements, not suddenly developing photographic memory, but it's real. And then there's the work on memory prosthetics. Theodore Berger, a biomedical engineer, has been developing a silicon chip that can mimic the function of the hippocampus. His eventual goal is to create an implantable device for patients with hippocampal damage, people like HM, who can't form new long-term memories. The chip would receive input from one part of the brain, process it the way a healthy hippocampus would, and send appropriate output signals to other brain regions. It's a long way from clinical use. The hippocampus is staggeringly complex, and reducing its function to a chip is like trying to replicate a symphony with a music box. But the fact that it's even being attempted is remarkable. We're not just understanding memory anymore. We're beginning to manipulate it, to augment it, to replace it. There's also fascinating work on the molecular biology of memory transfer. In 2018, researchers at UCLA did an experiment that sounds utterly bizarre. They transferred memories from one sea snail to another. They trained one group of snails to respond to electrical shocks. Then they extracted RNA, genetic material, from those trained snails and injected it into untrained snails. The untrained snails, without ever experiencing shocks themselves, showed the same defensive response as the trained snails. They'd been given a memory through molecular injection. Now, sea snails are very simple creatures. Their nervous systems are nothing like ours. This doesn't mean we can inject Shakespeare's knowledge into your brain with a needle, but it suggests that memories, at their most fundamental level, are encoded in molecules, and those molecules can, in principle, be transferred. What would it mean to live in a world where experiences could be shared that directly, where you could give someone not just a description of your vacation, but the actual sensory memories, where expertise could be transmitted biochemically? We're not there yet. We may never be there, but we're asking the questions. And in science, the questions matter almost as much as the answers, because questions define what's possible. They set the direction. They inspire the next generation of researchers to push further into the unknown. We've talked about memory formation, memory storage, memory retrieval, but we haven't talked enough about what happens when it all starts to fail, about Alzheimer's disease and the slow, cruel erosion of self. It starts small, forgetting where you put your keys, losing track of what you were saying mid-sentence, walking into a room and not remembering why you went there. Everyone does this occasionally, it's normal. But in Alzheimer's, it's persistent, progressive. Then come the bigger losses. Recent events disappear. You forget conversations from earlier in the day. You ask the same questions repeatedly because you don't remember asking them before, don't remember receiving an answer. Eventually, even old memories start to crumble. The wedding you attended last year, your children's names, your own life story. In the final stages, you might not recognize your spouse of 50 years, might not know your own name, might exist in a permanent confusion, unable to form or retrieve any coherent memory at all. It's a disease of subtraction. Bit by bit, the person you were is erased, until what remains is a body that breathes, but a mind that can't hold on to thoughts long enough to have them. There are roughly 6 million people in the United States alone living with Alzheimer's disease. That number is projected to triple by 2060 as the population ages. Each one of those people is experiencing the dissolution of their mental universe. And each has family members watching helplessly as someone they love disappears in slow motion. The disease was first described in 1906 by Alois Alzheimer, a German psychiatrist who performed an autopsy on a patient who had died after years of progressive dementia. Under the microscope, he saw something strange in her brain tissue, unusual plaques between neurons and tangled fibers within neurons. We now know those plaques are made of a protein called beta amyloid, and the tangles are composed of a protein called tau. Both accumulate in the brains of Alzheimer's patients, though we still don't fully understand if they're the cause of the disease or just symptoms of some deeper process. For more than a century, researchers have been trying to stop this disease, to slow it down, to reverse it. Progress has been frustratingly slow. Drug after drug has failed in clinical trials. Compounds that clear amyloid plaques from the brain don't necessarily restore cognitive function. It's like cleaning up a crime scene without solving the crime. But there are glimmers of hope. In 2023, new antibody treatments showed they could slow cognitive decline in early-stage Alzheimer's patients. Not stop it, not reverse it, but slow it, perhaps buying people a few more months or years of clarity. It's not enough, but it's something. It's proof that the disease is not completely inevitable, not completely unstoppable. There's also research into prevention, because Alzheimer's doesn't start when symptoms appear. It starts decades earlier, with the slow accumulation of plaques and tangles. And there are things you can do, maybe, to reduce your risk. Exercise, cardiovascular health, mental stimulation, social connection, quality sleep, managing stress. None of these are guarantees. Plenty of people who do everything right still develop Alzheimer's, but statistically they reduce risk. It's as if your brain has a cognitive reserve, a buffer built up through learning and experience and healthy living, and that reserve can help you withstand the damage longer before symptoms emerge. London taxi drivers with their enlarged hippocampi, they might have extra reserve. Musicians who've spent decades practicing complex motor skills, same thing. People who speak multiple languages, who read extensively, who engage in lifelong learning, they're all building up that protective buffer. You can't make yourself immune to Alzheimer's, but you might be able to delay it. And in the race between aging and medical progress, delay might be enough. If you can push the onset of symptoms back by 10 years, and if in those 10 years science develops better treatments, you might escape the disease entirely. It's a race. For millions of people, it's a race they're losing. But the finish line is moving. Science is progressing. Understanding is deepening. There's room for hope, even in the face of such a devastating condition. What strikes me most about Alzheimer's is what it reveals about the relationship between memory and identity. We are, in some fundamental sense, the stories we tell ourselves, the narrative we've constructed from our memories. Take those memories away, and what remains? Your body persists. Your capacity for emotion might remain. Many Alzheimer's patients can still feel joy, sadness, fear, even if they can't remember what prompted those emotions. But the continuity of self, the sense of being the same person who was born decades ago, who went to school, who fell in love, who raised children, who had a career, that dissolves. Families of Alzheimer's patients talk about this with heartbreaking clarity. They're still here, but they're also gone. It forces us to confront an uncomfortable question. Are we our memories? If so, what happens when they disappear? Do we disappear with them? Or is there something deeper, some core of consciousness or soul or whatever you want to call it, that persists independent of memory? I don't have an answer. I'm not sure anyone does. But Alzheimer's makes the question urgent, not abstract, not philosophical, desperately, painfully immediate.